Hello, this is Anna Hawkins, and the recording for my research methods workshop um, didn't work properly, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to do that again. So I'm just going to go over the things I talked about in my workshop just now. There wasn't a huge amount of talking and interaction, so you haven't missed much. I have captured some of the questions that I asked people who attended on some quiz slides, so I've got those to share with you now. So this is all the stuff that was really in my summary presentation, but just a reminder of my research background and my experience. I used to be an urban planner working in neighbourhood regeneration. I'm a social scientist, so primarily interested in sort of human interactions with environmental issues, so how people impact upon the environment and vice versa. A lot of my research interests around sort of consumption inequalities and designing programs for change. So a lot of my kind of research interest is not just finding out about things, but finding out about things with the purpose of changing those things. Some of my research projects at the moment include working on some food bank projects, so looking at food insecurity and different responses to that and how effective and sort of the moral questions around food banks. I'm also just starting a large project looking at high consumers of energy and resources, so lots of interventions tend to target people on low incomes to try and change their consumption behaviour. But this project is looking at the other end of the scale, looking at people who tend to have high incomes and consume an awful lot of resources, and looking at different strategies for changing their consumption behaviours. And I also do some work around food policy, the application of healthy food policies and sustainable food policies, thinking about how effective those policies are at influencing the way that people eat. So if you're interested in working with me, it might be because your research interests fall within one of these sorts of areas. Um, this is not an exclusive list, but it might resonate with you. So you could be interested in the impact of everyday consumption on the environment. So that can be a consumption of products that you might recognise, so food or clothing or that kind of thing. Cosmetics. What else have I single-use plastics, so actual things, but it could also be consumption of resources like water, energy, that kind of thing. Or it could be around consumption behaviours, things like how we travel around and holidays and all those kinds of things. You could be interested in changing consumption, so you could be particularly interested in that issue of change, how we can bring about change. Lifestyle habits, norms, so the kind of settled patterns of consumption behaviours, the thing that we take for granted as being completely normal and therefore quite difficult to change. That might be something that interests you. You could be broadly interested in the issue of living sustainably in cities, which is, as we know, where most people live, and even more people are going to live in the future. So how do we make cities more sustainable places to live? How do we create healthy and sustainable places to live and work? So health and sustainability intersect a lot with my work. And yeah, so you could be interested in kind of the health dimension as well, public health dimension. And you could be primarily interested in this issue of kind of climate justice or consumption inequality. So again, looking at that kind of that sort of moral aspect really about unequal levels of consumption and unequal levels of impact upon the environment. At this point, I will move myself out of the way. So I asked the people who attended the workshop to list some of the things that they were interested in. So they did that on a Mentimeter, and here were some of the things that came up: consumption of food waste, consumption inequality, single-use plastics, well-being, and sustainability around architecture, climate justice, how to make environmental practices more accessible, living sustainably in cities, some stuff around kind of healthy access to food, particularly around children, and fast fashion consumption habits, climate change policy, ecotourism, fast fashion, making companies greener and more sustainable, veganism, healthy diets, sustainable diets, that kind of thing. So these were some of the themes of interest that people put on the Mentimeter when they attended the workshop. So one thing to think about is the area of interest, but the other thing for you to think about are the methods that you think that you're most interested in. And this is really to do with understanding your strengths and weaknesses, your skills and interests as a potential researcher, because that's what you're going to be when you carry out this project. Move myself out of the way again. So just a reminder then, we've done this in research methods, but you're going to carry out some kind of primary data work usually. Certainly if you're working with me, I would advise that you be doing some kind of primary data work. If what you're interested in doing is statistical analysis of large existing data sets, then I'm probably not the best person to supervise you. You might want to look elsewhere, because I am primarily a qualitative researcher. But these are all kinds of methods that I do include in my supervisions and in my work. So surveys and questionnaires, interviews, focus groups, observations. That could be observations of people, it can be observations of place, content analysis, and that's where you look for new meaning in existing documents. So you might analyze policies, or you might analyze corporate publications and look for particular meanings in there. You might do counts and measurements and more numerical type data gathering methods, but you could be counting and measuring all sorts of different things that relate to different fields of interest. So then I asked people who attended what kinds of methods they were thinking they would like to use. So we had qualitative involving people, qualitative involving observation, quantitative involving people, quantitative without people, mixed methods, and not knowing at all. And that's is interesting that the majority of people who attended the workshop were interested in mixed methods, so a little bit of qualitative and a little bit of quantitative, which is a really valid way of carrying out some useful research within a limited amount of time, is to kind of incorporate some element of quantitative and then also have a qualitative dimension. So that was interesting. But this is really about you recognizing who you are as a researcher and not committing yourself to a research methods approach that you find enormously stressful. So if you find numerical analysis quite difficult, then don't commit to a large scale quantitative study. If you find the idea of engaging people, talking to people, terrifying, don't commit to a sort of in-depth series of focus groups or sorts of methods where you go and sort of spend a lot of time with your research participants, if we're ever allowed to do that again because of the pandemic. So then we discussed some of my past and current dissertation projects. These are only a selection. There are lots and lots of different ones, but consumption of single-use plastics is a real interest. It's particularly, again, become back into relevance around the pandemic, because that's increased use of PPE and disposables, and people are far less comfortable using renewable things. And even places that used to allow you to sort of take your own reusable coffee cup won't let you do that anymore. So there has been some of the advances that we've made in reducing single-use plastics culturally have sort of been wiped out, and it's interesting to reflect on that. Lots of research around sustainable diet, so different perceptions and barriers to adopting a more sustainable diet, and often that is something to do with like meat reduction or full veganism, or just understanding people's motivations for their dietary choices. And then I've also been recently supervising quite a few projects around urban green space, both the access to it and the quality of the design of it, and lots of different sorts of research around sustainable consumption of different products, fast fashion, cosmetics, just to name a couple. But I'm really interested to talk to people about lots of different sorts of ideas, and so yes, by all means, please do put me down on your list of supervisors if you think that one of my kind of areas of interest resonates with yours. A reminder of the next steps: to complete the supervisor allocation survey that's going to be coming around with an outline of your idea and your preferred list of supervisors. I tend to have quite a lot of people who want to do research in this area, so if you are interested in working with me, please do make sure you complete that in a timely manner. We then had time for questions. And really, there were some specific questions about whether I could supervise things on sustainable tourism practices, which I can, and whether it's possible to look at sustainability from a corporate perspective as well as an individual user perspective. So we had a quick discussion about that and the fact that it is. So you can look at consumption as an individual practice or as a collective social practice, but you can also look at it in terms of corporate practices. So you could look at the way that different corporations are changing their maybe their manufacturing practices or changing their product range in order to meet particular environmental targets. And you could do a critical analysis of that, and that you could use lots of different methods for that. So you could do the kind of direct contact methods of interviews and surveys, but you could also do the content analysis methods by looking at their corporate publications, their reports, their policy documents, their strategy documents, and that kind of thing, to try and understand what it is that that company's trying to do. There weren't any other real questions on that subject, so that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but you pretty much got the highlights. So sorry about the recording not working, but I hope that's been useful. Thanks.